I really do believe he would love to implement no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and here's the big one, no tax on anybody who makes less than 150 grand. Just think about that. Okay, tariffs are going to be inflationary, but you know what? If I whack your tax liability to zero, and oh, by the way, for most people in the country, tax is your largest yearly expense. That's going to be a game changer. Alrighty, folks, we are again doing something different. Video number 1, which came out yesterday, was Trump's an idiot, moron, and did it all wrong. In this video, we're going to flip the script and say Trump did it right and amazing things are going to happen. I know one thing for sure. You're going to hate one of these videos. That's just how Trump is. You either love him or hate him. We try to be intellectually honest. We want to play it out because, again, it's probably somewhere in the middle and there's going to be opportunities to be had. But Anna, just like the first video, I've set the timer for 22 minutes. And in this video, we're going to say Trump did an amazing job. He had to do it this way. Ladies first, what's your first thought?
I'm going to say completely opposite of what I said in the first video, that he is trying to push for bringing productivity back to the United States as both a financial impact and as a national security issue. Particularly, part of his tariffs that he's rolling out is to try to get us to have manufacturing come back to the United States. So he has brought back lots of investment commitment for things like AI, for things like electrical grid, for things like trying to get drugs and semiconductors made here. And so his push for trying to bring productivity back, and along those lines, taxing other countries through tariffs so that it becomes more advantageous for companies and U.S. citizens to buy American versus buying cheaper goods from other countries, could be a good thing down in the future, even though it's going to create a lot of volatility and is creating a lot of volatility and potentially creating short-term inflation for long-term, more deflationary, flat pro-growth policies.
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to highlight again, taking the, Trump did it right, is he's once again doing what he said. I mean, you can go back to all of his rallies and all of this, and there for at least the last 6 months ago, tariffs was a big part of the platform. And if you're not paying attention, the guy does what he says he's going to do. So the fact that we were caught flat-footed, the rest of the world was caught flat-footed, you just weren't paying attention. You thought he was going to be like every other politician and say whatever he had to say to get elected. He's a second-term president. And he knows this is his time to make his name. He wants to go out with a bang. He made tariffs a anchor for his running. And he's like, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to do this early because he knows he has that 2 years. So in his first term, he tackled very much pro-growth things. In this term, because this is going to be the heavy lift, he's doing that first. And then we'll do deregulation, tax cuts next. It is a strategy, again, get the hard stuff done first. And, again, heck, he's a politician and he did what he said he was going to do, unlike many other politicians. So, again, I think he's delivering on his campaign promises is my first thought.
Sure. And one of those things is DOGE, right? You can hate the way that it's been done or the way that it's rolled out, but here's the reality about cutting programs and cutting expenses. When countries get to the level of debt to GDP that we have, which is very unsustainable. Ray Dalio, as we mentioned in the first video, go back and listen to his books there. But when he talks about principles of big debt cycles, when countries get a certain amount of debt, they really have no choice but to do a couple of things. One is, we talked about a little bit, if you can increase productivity, that's great. But another thing is you push through something called austerity. And austerity is simply cutting back on the programs that the government provides to the country. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. But he basically had to come in and say, in order for us to stop growing our debt and kind of flatten the curve, which is the key. Right now, we have gotten to a place where we're spending 7% more of our GDP than what we're bringing in. So we're spending 7% to get, 3% GDP. And that's not sustainable to continue on that path. So he's trying to flatten that curve to where we're spending no more than 3% above what we bring in over time. And the big way that he's done that is implementing Doge and coming in and saying, we just absolutely have to completely change the bureaucracy, cut the number of people, improve on our technological systems, and unfortunately cut a whole lot of programs. So part of his Doge effort, which could turn out to be a very good thing to reverse the course of the trajectory of the debt that we're going on, which I would argue might be the biggest national security risk and economic risk of the country, is that growing US debt. He's come through and he said, we're done with DEI. We're done with green. We're done with funding, all kinds of things all over the world in hopes to make friends so that they will, continue to invest with us and come here. He's saying, I had to cut programs, and he has gone after it faster and grander than anyone could have imagined. But it could turn out that that's actually a really good thing, even if you don't like. Here's the thing. There's always going to be people that are hurt by being used to the government providing things and services and money that they're no longer doing. It creates tremendous disruption in the short term. But we could look back on history and say that one thing, really cutting programs, cutting funding to the rest of the world, and really getting lean as a country could end up being a really wonderful thing for our nation in the long term to reverse the course that we're heading on.
No, I love that one. And just to follow up on that, one of the things that I think Trump learned in his first administration was you can't drain the swamp slowly, right? Because the swamp and the tentacles and the, all of these other things get in the way. They throw sand in the gears and you actually don't get anywhere. So I think he's trying to take in the strategy of, no, screw it. We're going to do this thing as fast as possible, because again, we can't let the swamp things get in the way and slow us down, right? The swamp wants nothing more than to get to the mid-year elections and make him a lame duck president. That's what they want. So again, I think Trump learned his lesson from his first term. I think Elon Musk has done this before at Twitter and other places. And they're like, yeah, we know we're going to break stuff, but this is the only way that we can significantly reduce spending. And, if something gets broken, like at Twitter, where he fired some people that he shouldn't have, he just hires them back. So so they're ready for this. So the other thing I think about kind of along that lines and why he did everything all at once was he's trying to reverse the status quo, and you don't disrupt the status quo quietly. Right. We've had 40 years or 50 years of hollowing out manufacturing, exporting to foreign countries, allowing global corporations to job hop cheaper labor. And that has allowed us to import cheap stuff. Right. But unfortunately, there's a downside. And I think COVID really highlighted the fact that, yes, we might be, the biggest, country in the world, the most important country in the world, but we don't make anything.
Right.
If we get to a point like there's a true, a pandemic or a war, we can't make ships, we can't make tanks, we can't protect our citizens with pharmaceuticals, we can't make chips. Dude, we could fall to a third world country if, enough stuff goes wrong, because we don't build anything.
Right.
So he came out all at once, all of things to force conversations, to break things on purpose.
Absolutely.
And, that's again, I think he has chosen a path that says we're going to do this quick. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. He's talked about detox. He's talked about there's going to be pain. And, it's frankly, again, never forget, he's a New York real estate guy. There's a book called Art of the Deal. And if you haven't read it, read it. This is very much out of the Art of the Deal playbook. Come out swinging with some crazy, crazy things that forces reaction and pullbacks and, oh, by the way, negotiations. And again, if you believe what Scott Bessent said, there's at least 10 to 12 countries actively negotiating right now. So again, kind of worked. He's in a tough spot. You can't reverse 40 or 50 years of a trend quietly.
Absolutely. And I think we could look back on it and say, if 10 years from now we've got a debt that's coming down, that is manageable, we've got manufacturing jobs, excuse me, we've got semiconductors. I think the biggest thing is the semiconductors for tech, and it's the drugs. I
Yeah.
saw a statistic I was shocked about. It was close to 80% of the components of all drugs that we make in the United States actually come from China and other countries. And if they decide to cut us off, people die. We can't make medicines. And so just from a national security standpoint and an ability to not rely on so heavily on other nations to be able to bring production back, it's needed, even if it doesn't create an economic huge boom. And so I think we could look back and say we are no longer so dependent on other nations that might not have our best interest in heart, that could be considered our military enemies rather than allies. We're not relying on them. We're going to make sure that if something does happen, we can sustain our citizens, both financially and from a security standpoint, and their health. And so I think pushing for deglobalization, which really was pretty bipartisan on both sides after COVID, is something that we'll look back on and say this needed to happen. Hopefully it does create an economic boom. But I think, kind of to your point, these things take time, and he knows that he only has 4 years, but really 2 before real potential backlash where he loses Congress and it makes it much harder to push it through. So coming in fast and furious, as painful as it is to many, as much uncertainty as it creates, could be exactly what is needed, so that when you look back, a few administrations down, you've righted the ship and America is stronger in the future. One thing that I heard in a Scott Bessent interview, I think it was before the election, but maybe shortly thereafter, he said Trump knows he has 1 term to get this done, but the hope is that we get enough progress in this 1 term that the next president, can take that progress on, and through his 4 to 8 years, we can have a completely different country, much more growth, much more secure from a security standpoint in a world of wars and conflict. And so I think that's his goal, is to create so much change, so much disruption, that it's hard if he loses the election, or if Republicans don't get in when he's done in 4 years, that the other party cannot reverse it and go back to the way it was. And so that could be looked at strategically in the future as one of the smartest things a president ever did, even though he might be hated for it for a short-term period.
No, I agree with you. I really do think the administration is eyeing a 12-year plan, right? I believe the administration at this point sees Vance as the likely next, candidate, and they're going to be playing Vance for 8 years. That's the plan. So they're really looking at a 12-year journey here, in my opinion. And if you're gonna disrupt the world order, and you really have 2 years right before the midterms, you have no choice but to do it all at once.
Right.
So that you can get through, because the whole key to this is to get through the pain, the detox, as fast as possible, and then post wins.
Yes.
And then you post wins. Let's say the pain is 6 months, but then you've got 18 months of posting wins heading into the midterms. You look like a freaking genius.
Right.
And then you take, then you up your majority, and then you get Vance as a shoe in for 8 years. I mean, that's I think the game plan that they're looking at. And yes, we're in the first 6 months, and it's painful, and it frankly could get worse. The next thing I think that's really interesting when you look at the chessboard is they could be highlighting that China is a bad actor. What do I mean by that? Obviously, we as the largest importer to China, we know for a long time they steal intellectual property. They do all kinds of bad things. They don't let U.S. companies go there unless there's a 51% partner. All kinds of stuff we've known about. But now we're highlighting the fact that too much of the world is dependent on the monopoly of China. What do I mean by that? Well, just yesterday, as a sign of being a bad actor, they have come out and stopped rare earth shipments to the United States. Now, again, it's really funny. Rare earths aren't really that rare. So you can get these materials across the globe. But what is rare is the refining and creating of magnets out of this, which are required for chips in cars and all of these things.
Right.
So the fact that China is showing that they are willing to turn that off to injure someone is a sign to the rest of the world who is also dependent on China that they could too be turned off in a moment's notice. So again, I think one of the byproducts of this is highlighting to the world that depending on China for 80-85% of these things, not a good idea. So I think that's another thing that is coming from this very short negotiation or trade war.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't really thought of, I mean, our previous administration, blasted China as our horrible biggest enemy, for a long time as well. And I thought that Trump was kind of coming in and saying, no, we're going to kind of try to, make China, Russia, Iran, not our allies, but not our enemies. We're going to try to play better. He came out and said a lot of nice things about Xi and about China, and, they're good friends early on. But now, when he came out with these, tariffs that were really shocking, for everybody, he kind of said, oh, all these other countries are negotiate, but we're going harder after China. They retaliated. They shouldn't have done that. We're going harder. And it's like, he kind of did this about face, like, nope, you're my enemy, and made that kind of clear. So that's a really good point. If he can get, if China's kind of this rising superpower, which they have been, I mean, they're the largest likelihood country to kind of overtake the United States as the leader, of the world and economic prosperity for the world. That's why they're trying to, do things like the BRICS currency to dethrone us, kind of buddy up with Russia, etc. If he can get everybody to no longer view them as their friend, but as us being a better trading partner than them, because we, lower all these tariffs, et cetera, that could be very strategic in that standpoint. Along those lines, something I think that he could be, time will tell, but that he may be doing right. I'm going to be slammed for this. I'm going to be called a traitor, right? But the reality is the fact that he's trying to make peace with Russia, and he's trying to say, we don't want war. We have been a part of NATO pushing Ukraine to join. We know that you didn't want us to do that. We know we promised under Gorbachev we would not move an inch toward Russia, yet our country for decades under many administrations has done that. We're sorry. I'm changing things. We want to be friends. We were their ally in a previous war. Don't forget that. Many people think, Russia's our big enemy, but we were actually allies with them. And so him coming back and saying, we're going to not help NATO go after more of Russia. We're actually going to be your friend, and we're going to try to create peace and stop these wars. That could be looked at in the future as a very smart thing that de-escalated the threat of nuclear war, the threat of hot wars. Because if we can get Russia at least not to be our enemy, maybe not our ally, but at least not to be our enemy, and they have influence with China, and we can get to a place where we try to de-escalate in some way military and trade wars with China, there could be more peace in the globe. And that could end up being something that they come back and say, wow, as much as it was shocking, the fact that Trump is trying to end the war in Israel and end the war in Ukraine, and he's trying to bring peace, that could be a very good thing in the long term, regardless of your feelings about Russia, China, who's the real enemy, what we should and shouldn't do, who we should and shouldn't buddy up with. I'm learning that the more I research and learn about, all of the things going in Ukraine, the more I realize the American media has not been totally truthful about,
shocking,
any of these other countries and how involved and how much we've actually escalated wars around the world. It's easier to just say they're an enemy. We should never speak to them. Our prior administration, Russia's the enemy. We should never speak to them. China's the enemy. We should never speak to them. Actually speaking to them and trying to create peace might actually be looked back at as a really good thing for our country.
Yeah, the last thing I want to kind of highlight here, and again, Trump's doing it right, he's got to do it fast, is I do believe Trump has a big goal, two big goals, kind of underneath the surface that I wish he would talk about more. kind of highlighting, yes, there's going to be pain, but here's the carrot at the end of the rainbow, right? You got to get through the glass to get to the other side. And that is two things. First, I believe he wants to, take care of Main Street, right? I think he feels that Wall Street has had 40 years of a good run. I think he definitely sees, that the top 10 or top 20% has disproportionately won over the last 40 years as the expense of everyone else. I believe Trump is trying to take a big swing at changing that. So again, I believe that's important to him. And the other thing I do believe, and I don't think it's a talking point, because again, Trump is doing everything he said in his campaign. So it's not like this is just talking. Is I really do believe he would love to implement no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and here's the big one: no tax on anybody who makes less than 150 grand. Just think about that. Okay, tariffs are going to be inflationary, but you know what? If I whack your tax liability to zero, and oh, by the way, for most people in the country, tax is your largest yearly expense. That's going to be a game changer. And I believe, the one thing that Trump would love to say is he did that.
Yeah.
And that's all this tariff. And if you're going to reduce income here, you got to have income from somewhere else. So again, I believe Trump is trying to set it up where he has a legitimate chance at removing tax liability for anybody who makes less than 150 grand. And I think that's a great thing if he could make that happen.
Right. And I argued, in our last video that we might need tax increases instead of tax cuts to get out of the debt problem. However, there's many other problems. Debt isn't the only one. And the wealth inequalities of really a lot around the globe, but in the United States, really is something that is terrible for our country. I mean, the middle class has been wiped out. And granted, yes, some of them have moved up, but a lot of them have not. And those that are below middle class have really struggled. And so some of these agreements, the global agreements, the NAFTA agreements, et cetera, have not only whittled down the wealth of the middle class and the incomes of the middle class, but it's also made those that would have done some of those cheaper labor jobs lose them as well, because they were exported elsewhere for cheaper. And so if he can reverse that huge wealth gap that really potentially leads to civil wars. I mean, it really has historically. And he can say, we're going to try to make things better for the bottom so that they can realize the American dream again, give them more job opportunities, bring more things back, and then not tax them. That would be huge. The question is, how do you then pay for all the stuff and all the spending? And, that's part of why the messaging we talked about has been a little confusing on tariffs. But the thought is, yes, some of the tariffs is bullying, negotiating, trying to get everybody to come down to a really low, even playing field and basically more like free trade. But part of it, they really do want more tariff income instead of taxing people. Let's tax imports and let's, add tariff income. And I think by getting rid of taxes on Social Security for those that are living on a fixed income and for working overtime, he is basically helping those that are on Social Security. He's helping those to be incentivized to work harder rather than sit on unemployment on the government's money. Hey, you work overtime, we're not going to tax you. You get tips, we're not going to tax you. Think of how much more people will actually spend if they have more money. And that's good for productivity. And it's good for nations to not have just a upper class and a lower class. So yeah, I think it could turn out to be a really good thing over the long term, even if our debt does continue to grow a little bit in the short term, if we can find other ways to get that debt down, which is, back to the point of he's trying to do all of these things for a reason. It seems haphazard to some, but he's got a pretty concrete plan that Bessent has rolled out. And that is, you cut expenses, you cut deficit spending to no more than 3% of GDP instead of 7%. You cut expenses, you save, a significant amount of money so that you can then lower the taxes and you get productivity up. And another point is oil. It's like drill, baby, drill. Let's get oil production back. We have the Permian Basin. We have a significant amount of oil. If we can get oil prices down, that will increase the productivity and the incomes of the American people, because you're not paying so much in gas tax. And that gas tax flows through the gas prices, and gas taxes makes all things more expensive, and it increases the cost of living. So if he can get oil production back in energy production and be a dominant energy player again, and we can keep costs down while stoking productivity and those jobs that are created by being an energy efficient country instead of being energy dependent on the rest of the world, then that could also help significantly to boost the take-home pay of American citizens and bring productivity back.
Well, folks, at the end of the day, we tried to give an honest effort. Trump's an idiot or Trump's a genius. We tried to be honest on both sides, intellectually honest, because, again, that's just how we roll here. Let us know. Again, I promise you, one of these videos pissed you off. I see the comments.
I will say this. I hope that everybody listening to both of these videos, instead of thinking about what we said, whether it's right or wrong based on your political bias, right? We all have them. If we would say, what does this mean to me, right? This show is about financial freedom and creating financial freedom through real estate in part, but also entrepreneurship and all kinds of things. We're in a changing world order very, very clearly. There's a lot of disruption, and things aren't going to happen the way we want them to based on our political bias. What we've got to be able to do is say, where could things be going, and what do I do about it? How can I take advantage of the opportunity to grow my income and grow my wealth in the areas that the country is going to pour money into to make America great again, right? Whether you like them or you don't. And then what do I need to do to preserve what I already have, so that if these policies are very disruptive in the short term or the long term, I've done some things to protect my income, protect my wealth, protect my family. So when I look at politics these days and all these changes that are happening, I'm not going, man, I hate him, man, I love him, I like him or I don't like him, because I'm kind of bipolar on days that I like him and I don't, and I hate him and I love what he's doing. It's like, you know, I'm not all or nothing. But the biggest thing is, what's the so what to my family? What does this mean for our futures? And how do we need to adapt what we're doing or what we might do in the future so that we can protect and grow and prosper no matter what comes? So I hope that y'all think about these things and saying, well, what if Michael's right? What if On is right? What if Trump's right? What if Trump's wrong? What does that mean for me? And how can I be a wiser investor to navigate all these changes and uncertainty when the rest of the news is just saying doom and gloom, we're all toast? You know, we still have to choose our personal economy and choose to prosper for our families, and who's in government and what they do will definitely impact that. But ultimately, we're in control of our decisions. And so we need to watch these things and be open-minded and adapt as necessary.
Anna, you are amazing. Have a great week. I look forward to talking again. Thank you so much.
Good.